Friends, if you're a fan of high-speed action, massive explosions, and non-stop suspense, you're in the right place. If you're visiting our channel for the first time, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming content. Today, we're diving into the highly anticipated blockbuster Bullet Train Explosion 2025, a film that promises to set a new standard for action thrillers. In this video, we'll cover everything you need to know: the plot, where to watch it, and which OTT platforms or television channels will feature it. We'll also take you behind the scenes to explore the technical brilliance, from intricate stunt choreography to an intense, high-energy soundtrack, as well as details on pre-production, filming, and post-production. Plus, we'll discuss the film's budget, its projected box office performance, and fascinating behind-the-scenes facts. That's not all. I'll break down the storyline, introduce the cast, analyze their performances, and share which actor plays which role. Finally, I'll give you my own quick review so you know exactly what to expect before buying your ticket. Buckle up, because Bullet Train Explosion 2025 is going to be a high-speed, explosive ride from start to finish. Let's get started. The story of Bullet Train Explosion 2025 doesn't waste a single second before throwing the audience headfirst into chaos. It opens on a sleek, state-of-the-art bullet train departing from Tokyo, touted as the safest and fastest train in the world. For the first few minutes, everything feels routine: business executives tapping away at laptops, tourists snapping photos of the passing countryside, and a conductor proudly announcing their record-breaking speed. Then, out of nowhere, the calm shatters with a small but deliberate act of sabotage that hints something much larger is in motion. From the very beginning, the narrative hooks you with its real-time urgency. Instead of following the typical three-act build-up, the film plays with time in subtle but effective ways. There are sudden flashbacks revealing why key passengers are on the train, some connected to a shadowy corporation, others to a decades-old political scandal. These moments aren't just exposition, they're carefully timed revelations that keep you questioning every character's motives. You never really know if the person sitting quietly in seat 14B is an innocent bystander or the architect of the chaos. The first major turning point hits when the train's control systems are hijacked remotely. The driver is locked out, and the train accelerates far beyond safe limits. This isn't just about speed, it's about building tension with every passing kilometer. Conversations become confrontations, alliances form in unlikely places, and suspicion spreads through the cars like wildfire. The claustrophobic setting heightens every conflict, because no one can simply walk away. In the middle act, the perspective shifts between characters: a security officer on board struggling to maintain order, an investigative journalist piecing together the sabotage from clues in her notebook, and a mysterious passenger whose calm demeanor becomes more unnerving with every scene. These shifting viewpoints give the story a multi-layered intensity, allowing the audience to see the same moment from different angles, sometimes exposing truths, other times deepening the mystery. The second major turning point comes when an explosion rocks one of the rear cars, cutting off communication and forcing survivors to improvise. This is where the film truly leans into its high-stakes energy. The train's unstoppable forward momentum becomes a metaphor for the plot itself. There's no slowing down, no time to reflect, only decisions made under pressure that carry permanent consequences. The tension builds relentlessly, with each moment feeling like it could be the last before everything goes off the rails, literally and figuratively. By the final stretch, the narrative is a tightrope between disaster and salvation. Every character's earlier choices circle back in unexpected ways, revealing connections that were hiding in plain sight all along. The film doesn't just tell a story, it traps you inside it, moving at breakneck speed until the very last frame, where the real meaning of the chaos finally comes into view. The characters in Bullet Train Explosion 2025 are more than just passengers on a doomed ride, they are the engines that drive the story forward. Each one is introduced with just enough detail to spark curiosity, and as the plot hurtles ahead, layers begin to peel back, revealing motives, fears, and hidden connections. The security officer, for example, starts as a disciplined and by-the-book figure, someone you expect to hold the situation together. Yet as events spiral out of control, cracks begin to show in his composure. He transforms from a controlled professional into someone willing to break rules and take personal risks, revealing a deeply human vulnerability beneath the uniform. The investigative journalist begins the journey with a purely professional agenda, chasing a story for her own career advancement. But as she becomes entangled in the unfolding crisis, her priorities shift. She evolves into a reluctant protector, driven not by headlines but by a need to shield those around her. This transformation feels organic, shaped by her interactions with other passengers and the constant pressure of life or death stakes. One of the most intriguing arcs belongs to the mysterious passenger seated quietly in the middle carriage. At first, he seems like a background presence, observing, listening, rarely speaking. Slowly, the film reveals that he knows more about the sabotage than he lets on, forcing viewers to question whether he is a savior, a traitor, or something far more complicated. His calm demeanor masks a turbulent past, and when his true role is revealed, it reshapes the audience's understanding of earlier scenes. Relationships play a crucial role in heightening the tension. The security officer and the journalist begin with a mutual distrust, each suspecting the other of hiding something. As the situation worsens, that suspicion turns into an uneasy alliance, and eventually, a bond forged in survival. Their evolving dynamic becomes a central thread, allowing moments of human connection to cut through the relentless action. Even minor characters are given moments to shine: a retired engineer who knows the train systems better than anyone else, a young student whose quick thinking saves lives, a mother who hides a secret about why she is traveling. These smaller arcs weave into the main narrative, giving the sense that every person on the train matters, and that the fate of the whole depends on the actions of the few. By the time the train reaches its most perilous moment, the audience has seen these characters tested, broken, and reshaped by the journey. The film uses the confined setting not just for suspense but as a crucible for transformation, where true personalities emerge under pressure and alliances are forged in fire. The performances in Bullet Train Explosion 2025 are as critical to its impact as the set pieces and stunts. The lead actor, portraying the security officer, delivers a performance that balances authority with raw humanity. From the first moment he steps into frame, there is a commanding presence in his body language, the kind that reassures the passengers and the audience alike. Yet as the crisis escalates, his voice carries the tremor of someone who realizes control is slipping away, and those subtle shifts in expression, tightened jaw, restless eyes, tell the story even when no words are spoken. The investigative journalist is brought to life with a sharp intelligence and a simmering intensity that makes her instantly compelling. The actress captures the duality of her character, ambitious and self-assured at the start, yet gradually allowing cracks of vulnerability to show. Her chemistry with the security officer feels unforced, developing naturally as circumstances throw them together. It is in the quieter moments, like when she silently observes the chaos and recalculates her next move, that her performance truly deepens the film's emotional weight. The mysterious passenger becomes the film's enigma, and the actor's restraint is what makes him unforgettable. He speaks sparingly, but every glance, every slight smirk, feels loaded with meaning. His ability to hold the audience's attention without dominating the scene is a skill not every performer has, and it turns his character into a magnetic focal point whenever he appears. Supporting performances add richness to the ensemble. The veteran actor playing the retired engineer imbues the role with quiet gravitas, grounding the technical exposition in believable human experience. The young student character is portrayed with fresh, unpolished energy, making their moments of bravery feel spontaneous and real. Even the smallest roles, the mother clutching a bag a little too tightly, the business executive trying to negotiate with the unseen saboteur, are delivered with a level of conviction that prevents them from fading into the background. What stands out is how well the cast works together under the film's relentless pace. The actors are constantly reacting to one another, making each scene feel alive and unpredictable. Every raised eyebrow, shouted order, or panicked whisper adds to the sense of being trapped in a shared nightmare. In a story that thrives on tension and human stakes, the performances do more than carry the plot forward, they make the danger feel personal. The direction in Bullet Train Explosion 2025 establishes tension before the plot even announces itself. The first shots are disciplined and symmetrical. Pristine aisles, mirrored windows, vanishing point compositions that turn the carriage into a corridor of inevitability. The director uses the geometry of the train as grammar. Orderly frames and measured dolly moves set a crisp, almost clinical mood, so that when the first sabotage cue arrives, the camera language fractures with it. The lens shifts from controlled tracking to nervous handheld, the horizon tilts by degrees, and those perfect lines become traps that funnel characters toward danger. Pacing is engineered like a timetable, but with deliberate delays that make the wait unbearable. Early scenes breathe with longer takes, letting us settle into routines, a conductor's ritual checks, a journalist's observational silence, the security officer's quiet scan of the crowd. Then the tempo spikes without warning. Cuts compress the distance between cars, whip pans stitch panic across compartments, and the edit rides the rhythm of the train itself, sinking to the metallic clack of wheels. When the control systems are hijacked, the film plays with temporal elasticity. Action unfolds in real time in the present cars, while backstory appears as sharp intrusions, not soft flashbacks. These memory fragments arrive like jolts, precisely timed to reframe what we think we know about the people on board. Shot composition doubles as character study. Tight close-ups box the security officer inside door frames and headrests, emphasizing the shrinking avenues of control. The journalist is framed in reflections, window glass, phone screens, polished metal, suggesting a mind built to see in layers. The mysterious passenger often sits in split diopter setups that keep a foreground distraction and a background threat both tack sharp, allowing the eye to roam and the suspicion to linger. Whenever alliances shift, the blocking shifts diagonally, crossing bodies in the aisle so the composition itself argues with the dialogue. Lighting evolves with the crisis and turns the train into an emotional barometer. Early scenes bathe in cool, brushed steel blues. As systems fail, emergency strobes inject pulses of red that carve faces into relief, a visual heartbeat that tightens the chest. Passing tunnel lights become natural metronomes for suspense, flickering across frames to create micro-blackouts that the edit weaponizes for jump cuts and sleight-of-hand reveals. In the aftermath of the rear car explosion, the director drops into near silence and dim sodium haze, letting the hiss of depressurization and the sparkle of drifting particulates sell the shock better than any speech could. Action is staged with ruthless clarity. The cramped cars could have devolved into chaos, but the director maps the train like a chessboard. Each set piece is anchored by a clean objective and a traceable route. Who starts in which car, what door jams, which coupling threatens to shear. Overhead inserts and quick blueprint flashes provide just enough orientation without breaking immersion. When speed becomes the antagonist, camera placement sells it. Low angles near the wheels, long lens compression outside the windows, and a subtle shutter adjustment that turns the world beyond the glass into streaks of peril. Practical effects do the heavy lifting and digital work is treated like invisible glue, so hits feel weighty, sparks feel hot, and the train's mass never stops being terrifying. Sound design and music are deployed as steering mechanisms for mood. The director favors dynamic range over wall-to-wall score. The clatter of bogies, hydraulic sighs, and the faint whine of overstrained motors become signatures we learn to fear. The score slips in only when the human stakes crest, built around a motif that starts as a steady pulse and mutates into a racing thrum as systems fail. At key beats, silence lands like a decision. Oxygen cut, calms dead, and the film lets us hear nothing but breath and fabric. Those choices make the eventual return of noise feel like impact. The film's perspective strategy is another distinctive choice. Rather than omniscience, the director commits to limited knowledge per scene, then rotates viewpoint to make revelations feel earned. We learn a clue with the journalist and feel the risk of a wrong inference. We experience command fallibility with the security officer when orders collide with physics. Intercutting outside response teams is rationed and coldly lit, a deliberate contrast that keeps the audience emotionally tethered to the cars where sweat and consequences live. The result is empathy by design. Every cut asks whose fear we're inhabiting now. Finally, the director threads recurring visual motifs that pay off thematically. Parallel lines of track and aisle echo choices that must be made at speed. Door mechanisms become punctuation marks for turning points. When they seal, a path dies. When they jam, ingenuity becomes the only tool. A simple prop, the red emergency cord, returns in different hands, each time meaning something new. Defiance, desperation, sacrifice. By the last act, the filmmaking language the director taught in the calm opening is flipped against us. We see a perfect composition and brace for it to break. We hear the rhythm of the wheels and know a decision is overdue, and the train keeps racing forward because the story's momentum and the cameras are the same thing. The cinematography in Bullet Train Explosion 2025 is as much a character as any of the passengers, shaping the way the audience experiences every jolt of tension and every fleeting moment of calm. The camera rarely feels like an observer. It's a passenger itself, weaving through narrow aisles, ducking past seatbacks, and pressing close enough to see the sweat gather at a character's temple. Early on, wide establishing shots showcase the train's sleek, polished interiors and the rhythm of its forward glide, using symmetrical framing that mirrors the order and control of a journey that, at this point, feels unshakable. The lighting is cool and even, giving the metal surfaces a pristine glow, almost daring you to believe nothing could go wrong. When the sabotage begins, the cinematography fractures that composure. Handheld shots replace smooth dolly moves, and the lens begins to follow characters with an almost restless urgency. Tight close-ups crowd the frame, cutting off peripheral space to emphasize the claustrophobia. Passengers are boxed in by their surroundings, faces pressed against window glass, reflections layered over them like visual metaphors for trapped thoughts. The train itself becomes a visual prison, with the camera never letting you forget there's nowhere else to go. One of the most visually striking choices is the way movement outside the windows is handled. The background blurs into streaks of color, turning the world beyond the train into an abstract smear of speed and danger. During key moments, the cinematographer slows the shutter just enough to create a dreamlike streaking effect, amplifying the sensation that time is warping under the strain of the crisis. In contrast, certain moments of stillness, like the aftermath of the first explosion, are captured in wide, almost painterly shots, letting the quiet destruction speak for itself. Lighting evolves as the stakes climb. At first, natural daylight and soft LED illumination dominate, but as systems fail, the environment shifts into harsh, directional lighting from emergency sources. Reds pulse through the aisles like an alarm you can't turn off, and shadows carve deep lines across faces, making every glance feel loaded with meaning. Passing tunnels intermittently plunge the cars into darkness, creating a strobe-like rhythm that the camera uses to mask sudden reveals or cuts in action. Framing is never static in its storytelling. Characters in control are framed centrally, stable in the shot, but as the situation unravels, compositions tilt and crowd them to the edges. The security officer is often shot from low angles during his moments of authority, but as his confidence slips, the camera rises above him, subtly reversing the power dynamic. The journalist is frequently framed through layers, seatbacks, reflections, door windows, visually marking her as someone who sees beyond the obvious but is separated from the full truth. In the film's climactic sequences, the cinematography becomes relentless, with tracking shots that chase characters through multiple cars in a single take, the camera weaving with their panic. The use of depth of field narrows during moments of decision, isolating a single face in sharp focus while the chaos behind blurs into insignificance, making the audience feel as though they too must block out the noise to survive. The result is an intense visual language where every angle, light source, and frame placement is chosen not just for beauty, but to keep the viewer locked inside the speeding, unstoppable world of the bullet train. The editing in Bullet Train Explosion 2025 moves like a conductor with a stopwatch, calibrating every cut to the hiss of doors and the clatter of wheels. Early on, shot lengths breathe. We linger on routines and small gestures so the normalcy imprints itself. Then, the first disturbance snaps the timeline tighter. Average shot duration drops, and you feel it. Dialogue scenes start to trade in J-cuts and L-cuts so sound arrives a split second before image or hangs a beat after, turning ordinary lines into ticking sounds of dread. The film uses continuity as a lure and rupture as a weapon, letting sequences glide for 30 or 40 seconds before a hard, percussive smash cut knocks the floor out from under you. Geography stays readable even when panic takes over. The editor stitches each set piece around clean motion vectors and recurring anchors, the carriage numbers, door indicators, coupling plates, so you always know where the danger is coming from. When chaos spikes, the cut rate accelerates, but inserts are surgical rather than noisy, a brake gauge redlining, a comms light stuttering, a hand slipping on polished steel. That economy gives each image authority. The big action runs are built on cascading mini beats, objective stated, route chosen, obstacle revealed, workaround invented, consequence paid. You can feel the rhythm stacking, a ladder of quick cuts that pays off with a held shot to let the impact land. Transitions become storytelling. Flashbacks don't dissolve like memories, they punch in like evidence. A present tense sound, metal grinding, an alarm chirp, bridges into the past, so the cut feels like a thought detonating. The train's speed becomes an editorial clock. In exterior shots, the editor favors longer lenses and holds just a hair longer than comfort, letting the world smear by until it turns abstract. Returning inside, the cut often arrives on breath rather than action, emphasizing human endurance over spectacle. When the rear car explosion tears through the convoy, the film drops into a near-silent sequence, expanding time with elongated takes and micro-edits on debris, faces, and drifting dust. It's not slow motion, it's emotional dilation. Dialogue scenes are wired with tension through overlap and interruption. The editor leans on reaction shots that arrive a fraction early, so we read intent before we hear words. In confrontations, jump cuts appear sparingly, not as a style flex but as a pulse, 1, 2, marking a character's fraying control. Cross-cutting is rationed. Exterior response teams and control rooms cut in at strategic plateaus, providing relief valves that paradoxically raise pressure by reminding us of how little help can actually reach the cars. Those interludes are colder in color and cleaner in rhythm, a contrast that snaps back to the onboard chaos with a jolt. Pacing arcs across the whole film like a rail gradient. The first third trains your eye with orderly sequences and measured edits, the middle third fractures into a breathless relay of cause and effect, and the final stretch alternates sprint and stillness to weaponize anticipation. Twice, the movie plants deliberate breathers, 30 to 40 seconds where the cut rate eases and sound folds inward, only to explode forward with a momentum burst that makes the following action feel faster than it really is. Speed ramping is resisted. Instead, pacing relies on placement of micro payoffs and withheld reveals. A match cut from a schematic coupling to the real one under strain lands like an equation solved. A cut from a hand on a door to a door refusing to obey is timed to a quarter beat off the musical phrase, wrong-footing your expectations and tightening your chest. The editor keeps character clarity front and center. Ensemble scenes weave in threaded close-ups so no arc gets lost to the spectacle. When the security officer's resolve falters, the coverage compresses around him and holds a fraction too long on nonverbal tells, inviting you to lean in. The journalist's breakthroughs arrive on pre-lapped audio, thought preceding image, which makes each discovery feel earned rather than delivered. The mysterious passenger scenes trim connective tissue on purpose. Cuts land on outcomes, not processes, preserving his aura without confusing the plot. By the time the train barrels into the final movement, the rhythm has taught you how to watch. You start counting the beats between edits, waiting for the hold that signals a reveal or the staccato burst that means run. The flow never feels arbitrary. It's designed like track work, switches, sidings, and straightaways, so the emotional impact hits on schedule even as the story threatens to derail. The score in Bullet Train Explosion 2025 treats the train like an instrument and the rail line like sheet music. From the opening departure, a 4-note pulse mirrors the wheel click, soft at first, almost polite, then tightens into a metronome for the whole film. That pulse isn't just rhythm, it's a narrative tell. Every time systems strain, the motif spreads to other sections. Pizzicato strings echo it under dialogue, muted brass turns it into warning, and later a detuned synth grinds it into threat. The composer blends orchestral muscle with industrial electronics, taiko-like floor toms, brushed snares, bowed metals, and granular textures that sound like electricity chewing through steel, so the palette always feels born of the setting. Character writing is handled with clean, memorable signatures that evolve under pressure. The security officer carries a rising fifth that first appears on warm low brass, confident and steady. By mid-film it's played on breathy woodwinds at the edge of audibility, suggesting resolve bending but not breaking, and in the final run it comes back as a brash trumpet figure cut with metallic percussion, resolve reforged. The journalist's cue is a quick piano ostinato that keeps skipping a beat, a clever rhythmic hitch that tracks how her deductions leap ahead of what others see. When she lands a breakthrough, the ostinato resolves into a complete bar, the ear hears the answer before the scene says it. The mysterious passenger gets the film's strangest sound, a distant station chime sampled, stretched, and pitched into a glassy, almost religious tone. When his intentions tilt, the chime stops resolving, hanging a semitone wide like a question that refuses to close. The standout set pieces are mapped as musical arguments rather than wall-to-wall bombast. The control system hijack begins with near silence, then a high, single synth note creeps in under the ambient carriage hum. It starts to flutter, not vibrato but micro-glitches, and the moment the throttle locks open, low percussion arrives in staggered entries, each drum panned along the length of the train so it feels like danger rushing car to car. The rear car explosion sequence flips the rulebook. The score drops out completely for 3 long breaths. Only after the shock settles does a hushed string cluster return, voiced so close that adjacent notes beat against each other, a sonic depiction of panic trying to breathe through tight air. Later, in the tunnel gauntlet, the composer plays with metric modulation. The main pulse reappears in 7, then in 5, tricking the body into losing footing just as the lights strobe. You don't count it, you feel your balance go. The integration with natural sound is meticulous. Door chimes are recorded and repurposed into melodic cells. The overhead announcement tone becomes a little two-note question the score keeps answering in different keys, and the rhythmic thrum of the tracks is sometimes captured and folded into the percussion bed so you can't tell where environment ends and music begins. When a coupling threatens to shear, the music smuggles in a pure sine tone tuned to the metal's resonant frequency. It sits under the scene like a wordless premonition, more sense than heard. The mix favors intelligibility over sheer volume. dialogue breaths through side-chained mids, the sub-bass saves its weight for acceleration beats and impact moments, and high-frequency alarms are allowed to sting briefly before the score cushions them, keeping tension sharp without listener fatigue. Silence is treated as a theme. The composer doesn't just mute, they sculpt absence. During the oxygen cut, the entire high end vanishes and the remaining cues sit like a pressure on the chest, a low, nearly tactile hum that makes you inhale. In the brief reprieve sequences, instrumentation thins to solo colors, a lonely bass clarinet tracing the aisle, a single prepared piano note rattling with metallic overtones, a bow across a suspended cymbal that blooms and evaporates. These sparse cues keep the emotional needle moving without lying to the audience about safety. Recurring motifs thread scenes together in ways that pay off. The 4-note rail pulse shows up diegetically when a busker's phone ringtone plays a clipped, cheerful version on the platform, then returns moments later inside the score warped and minor, foreshadowing how the ordinary will turn adversarial. The security officer's rising interval is harmonized with the journalist's ostinato in a late sequence where their agendas finally align. It's not a duet so much as two machines locking gears, a small musical thrill that makes their teamwork feel inevitable. And when the train finally sees daylight after the tunnel run, the motif doesn't soar, it thins to harmonics on strings and a breath of choir-like synth, acknowledging relief without pretending the danger's over. The composer resists the easy choice to drench everything. Big crescendos are rationed and placed like detonators, which makes them land harder. A chase through two cars is driven not by percussion but by a relentless shaker line and call legno strings tapping like bolts ricocheting on the floor, leaving room for cutlery clatter and the ragged edge of voices to carry the stress. When the film needs full-body adrenaline, the cue arrives with layered ostinati that stack in polyrhythm, triplets against straight time, then a hammered piano doubling the toms, so your pulse races without the mix turning to mush. By the end, you can trace the story purely through the music. The pulse that started like a promise has been bent, stretched, scarred, and finally recentered. The motifs that once belonged to individuals have learned to coexist. And the sounds of the train, chimes, doors, wind, metal, have been absorbed into a score that feels native to the world on screen, present when the film needs propulsion, absent when it needs truth, always calibrated to the exact emotional speed of the ride. Bullet Train Explosion 2025 treats speed as both miracle and menace. The film keeps asking what happens when a culture builds machines to outrun uncertainty and then discovers the machine is the uncertainty. Every mechanical triumph on board, the frictionless doors, the self-correcting controls, the immaculate timetable, reads like a promise of control, and the sabotage rips that promise open. The theme lands not as a lecture about technology but as a feeling. The moment systems you don't fully understand make choices for you. Characters must relearn agency on the fly, replacing trust in automation with trust in judgment, and the story frames that pivot as a kind of ethical muscle memory waking up under pressure. Trust and suspicion become a social engine that powers the plot. Confinement turns every glance into data and every silence into evidence. The film plays with how quickly humans form narratives about each other, especially when time is compressed and risk is high. Small details carry absurd weight, a mismatched ticket, a bag set down and then moved, a habit of counting seconds, and those snap judgments cut both ways, saving lives in one scene and endangering them in another. The message isn't that paranoia is wise, it's that trust is work, and in crisis it must be built deliberately from behavior rather than borrowed from appearances or credentials. Accountability threads through the corporate backstory without drowning the thriller. A glossy safety record, a buried memo, a deferred maintenance decision. The film shows how abstract choices taken in conference rooms become concrete dangers measured in meters and seconds. No one twirls a mustache. The critique is sharper for being procedural. The retired engineer's guilt doesn't absolve anyone. It refracts a larger pattern where responsibility gets smeared across org charts until it feels owned by no one. When the train outruns oversight, the theme flips. Oversight was never supposed to chase, it was supposed to lead. Another theme the film worries at is information versus truth. The journalist's arc turns reporting into survival skill, but the script keeps her honest about the distance between having facts and knowing what they mean. Flashback fragments look authoritative until a later angle contradicts them, and the movie delights in showing how a compelling story can be wrong and still feel right. Announcements over the intercom become a chorus of plausible certainty that ages poorly by the minute. The larger message is sly. Clarity is not a resource you find, it is one you manufacture responsibly, under duress, with stakes you do not get to choose. Class and access are etched into the train's architecture. Seat density, door placement, and staff presence vary car to car, and those practical differences become moral ones the moment something explodes. Who has room to maneuver, who has information first, who gets to appeal to authority? These aren't accidents, and the film refuses to treat them as such. When resources run thin, the story pushes characters into triage decisions that expose values they didn't know they held. Sacrifice is not depicted as a grand pose, it's a consequence of unequal options, and the movie makes sure we notice who keeps getting asked to be brave. Leadership under uncertainty emerges as a running examination rather than a coronation. The security officer's authority is useful until the situation stops matching training, and then leadership becomes a choreography of listening, delegating, and absorbing blame. The movie is fascinated by the difference between command and influence, between being obeyed and being trusted. Mistakes are not plot coupons, they are real costs that the film remembers, and the message that survives is merciless but humane. Competence is moral because it prevents grief. The motif of doors functions like a theme in miniature. Doors close to secure, to exclude, to protect, to abandon. Each time a mechanism hisses, the film asks what kind of boundary is being drawn and who pays for it. Couplings and cords tell the same story. Connection is safety until connection is the point of failure, and then improvisation, rope, belt, hand, becomes a political act. Even the recurring chime, cheerful by design, curdles into dread by association, a neat demonstration of how meaning is not an attribute but an accumulation. Memory and time get treated as unreliable narrators. The structure folds in flashes that correct earlier assumptions, and the characters themselves misremember in plausible ways. Under stress, they simplify to survive and later have to live with what those simplifications cost. The theme isn't cynicism about human recall, it's sympathy for it. The film suggests that in disasters personal and public, we tell ourselves stories to endure the moment and then owe it to the aftermath to revisit those stories with less adrenaline and more care. Finally, interdependence sits beneath the noise like a quiet thesis. Nothing on the train works alone, not the systems, not the rescue attempts, not the people. Expertise passes hand to hand, courage sparks by proximity, and even antagonists rely on an invisible web of cooperation they pretend to transcend. The message lands in the body rather than the brain during a sequence where success depends on three characters who barely like each other performing a task none of them can complete solo. The film's most persuasive idea is simple and stubborn. In a world obsessed with speed, the thing that keeps us alive is not how fast we move, but how well we move together. The visual effects in Bullet Train Explosion 2025 work less like a neon sign and more like an invisible scaffold, holding the spectacle steady without calling attention to the engineering. The first act hides most of its digital work in subtle augmentation, extending city skylines through carriage windows, stitching together impossible continuous shots down the train's length, and replacing controlled studio lighting with simulated reflections from passing countryside. It's the kind of CGI that works best when the audience doesn't realize it's there until a second viewing, and even then it feels more like sleight of hand than showboating. Practical effects anchor the big moments so the digital elements have something to hold on to. When the first explosion tears through a rear car, it's a blend. Real pyrotechnics provide heat, debris, and smoke plumes that interact with actors, while VFX adds structural deformation and rolling fire down the corridor. The choice to capture the blast physically means the camera feels weight and concussion, and the digital overlays become amplifiers rather than replacements. This philosophy repeats throughout. Sparks are mostly real, pressure bursts are shot with compressed air rigs, and stunt performers take genuine hits against padded set pieces before the background is digitally extended into high-speed blur. One of the most impressive integrations comes during the hijack sequence. The train's acceleration past its safety limit is sold through a combination of in-camera motion tricks and digital speed passes. Inside the cars, subtle green screen window replacements allow the landscape to streak by faster than any real location shoot could sustain. Outside, the train's CGI model is used sparingly, with enough physical reference plates to preserve texture and lighting continuity. Small environmental details, displaced ballast, vibrating overhead cables, roadside debris pulled into slipstreams, are all added in post, giving the sense of a world reacting violently to the train's new velocity. CGI also plays a quiet but essential role in the film's geography. The production stitched together multiple real-world train interiors into a single continuous digital layout, so when the camera tracks through 5 or 6 cars without a visible cut, the illusion holds. Even exterior passes, often done with miniature models, are cleaned with digital paint to match the interior geography, ensuring the audience never spots a mismatch between where characters should be and where the train appears to be on the track. The tunnel gauntlet sequence is where the visual effects team leans harder into stylization. The flicker of passing lights was partly achieved with on-set rigs, but the VFX team manipulated the timing in post to match the scene's shifting rhythm, sometimes stretching the darkness between lights just long enough to hide a sudden reveal. Sparks ricochet off walls in believable arcs thanks to particle simulations grounded by real reference footage, and the occasional shudder of the train is digitally exaggerated to tip furniture, rattle fixtures, and jolt handheld shots with synchronized motion blur. Water and fire effects, a notorious weak point for lesser CGI, are deployed with care. The flooding of the forward compartments uses practical water tanks, with digital work enhancing volume, adding reflections, and erasing safety rigs. Flames in the cramped carriage interiors are mostly real, with VFX adding trailing embers, smoke layering, and subtle heat distortion that bends light and background geometry. Because the physical firelight hits actors' faces and costumes on set, the compositing reads as seamless, and the audience never has to mentally excuse the shot. One clever touch is the way visual effects are used to manipulate perspective inside the train. Slight digital warps lengthen aisles or compress compartments depending on the tension of the moment, playing with subconscious spatial awareness. These tweaks are so minor they pass unnoticed, yet they nudge the audience's sense of safety. Spaces feel longer to cross when danger is behind you and shorter when escape feels impossible. Even the film's most elaborate digital creation, the final high-speed derailment, avoids cartoon physics by grounding the destruction in miniature work and practical debris elements. The VFX team built the collapse around real objects captured in slow motion, splintered wood, torn upholstery, and shards of glass lit and shot to match the CG train's motion. The result is chaos with weight, where every fragment has texture and every collision respects momentum. By the time the credits roll, the visual effects have touched nearly every frame, but they rarely announce themselves. They've been built into the DNA of the film's realism, reinforcing the claustrophobia, danger, and speed without making the audience step outside the ride to admire the craftsmanship. The practical and digital elements aren't competing, they're in constant handshake, one grounding the other, so the illusion holds no matter how fast the train moves or how much of it explodes. The set design in Bullet Train Explosion 2025 does more than just give the actors a place to stand, it builds a world that feels lived in, dangerous, and constantly in motion. From the moment we step aboard, the train is not just a vehicle but a character in its own right, with every carriage telling a different story through its details. The standard passenger cars are a study in layered realism. Scuffed flooring that hints at years of service, upholstery with faint stains from 1,000 hurried meals, and luggage racks cluttered with mismatched bags that suggest the chaotic lives of their owners. Even the safety signage feels authentic, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless it was missing. The luxury carriage pushes the opposite way. Polished wood paneling, subtle lighting tucked into brass fixtures, and glass partitions etched with decorative patterns. This attention to contrast between classes isn't just visual flair, it subtly underscores the tension between the passengers and sets the stage for conflicts that unfold later. The production team doesn't shy away from letting wear and tear creep into these spaces either. Tiny cracks in the glass, worn brass edges, and carpets that ripple slightly underfoot all sell the idea of a train that's beautiful but aging, masking fragility beneath its shine. As the story progresses, the set evolves with the action. After the first explosion, the once pristine corridors are a mess of debris, smoke damage, and dangling electrical wires. The art department nails the gradual degradation. At first it's subtle, a scorch mark on a wall or a dent in a metal door, but as events escalate, the train feels increasingly like a war zone. Chairs are torn from their mounts, baggage is strewn across aisles, and entire sections of paneling hang loose, swaying with the motion of the train. Every change feels organic to the moment, as though the environment is reacting alongside the characters. The locations outside the train aren't an afterthought either. Brief moments in station platforms before departure offer a grounded sense of place. Flickering fluorescent lights, graffiti-tagged columns, vendors selling coffee to rushed commuters. Once the train is in motion, glimpses of landscapes through windows are carefully curated, urban sprawl giving way to industrial yards, then to open countryside, and finally to rugged terrain where danger seems to lurk just beyond the next curve. Even though much of it is seen in passing, these background elements give the journey a tangible geography, keeping the audience oriented even as chaos unfolds inside. Props are equally thoughtful in their storytelling. A dropped ticket, a half-finished cup of tea, or a child's toy sliding slowly along the floor as the train tilts, These small details help anchor the big action in a reality the audience can believe. Weapons and tools used by the characters feel grounded in the train environment, improvised from maintenance gear, catering equipment, or items pulled from passengers' luggage. This practical approach keeps the action inventive and ties it directly to the setting rather than relying on generic props. One standout location within the train is the maintenance compartment, which becomes pivotal in the midsection of the film. The cramped metallic space is cluttered with coiled cables, worn tools, and emergency kits shoved into rusting cabinets. The lighting here is harsher, throwing sharp shadows that make it feel both claustrophobic and tense. It's a perfect contrast to the more public areas, serving as a reminder that beneath the passenger experience lies a working machine with its own secrets. Even when the action spills outside during a brief emergency stop, the location design stays sharp. The deserted rural station is weathered and overgrown, with chipped paint on the signs and platform edges crumbling away. It's the kind of place that feels forgotten by the world, amplifying the character's sense of isolation when trouble follows them off the train. Throughout, the set design serves the story rather than distracting from it. It grounds the action in a believable space, gives the audience visual variety without breaking immersion, and ensures that every location change means something to the plot. By the end, the destruction of the train feels almost personal, as though we've lost a place we've come to know, because in a way we have. The dialogue in Bullet Train Explosion 2025 crackles with a sense of urgency, wit, and raw emotion that keeps the audience hooked from start to finish. It doesn't fall into the trap of generic action movie banter. Instead, it balances high-stakes tension with moments of surprising humor and humanity. Conversations feel organic, as if the characters are reacting in real time to the chaos unfolding around them rather than reciting lines from a script. The pacing of the dialogue mirrors the intensity of the story, rapid exchanges during high-speed sequences, and slower, more deliberate beats when emotions need room to breathe. One of the film's strengths lies in how it uses speech to reveal character without spelling everything out. The stoic ex-detective rarely wastes words, speaking in clipped, precise sentences that hint at his disciplined past and emotional walls. In contrast, the young tech-savvy passenger rattles off quick-fire theories and sarcastic observations, her nervous energy bleeding through every exchange. Even the antagonists get distinct voices, with lines that carry an undercurrent of menace wrapped in calm confidence, making them just as intriguing to listen to as they are to watch. There are moments where the dialogue does more than move the plot forward, it deepens the themes. A heated debate between two survivors about whether to stop the train or save the passengers first isn't just about strategy. It's a clash of personal philosophies shaped by their past traumas. These exchanges pull the audience into the moral gray areas of the story, making them think about what they would do in the same situation. Humor, when it appears, is used like a pressure valve. A perfectly timed quip about the world's worst dining car experience lands right after a nail-biting sequence, giving the audience just enough relief before plunging back into the action. This kind of writing prevents the tone from becoming monotonous and makes the characters feel more relatable. They're not just action figures in a set piece, they're people coping with extraordinary circumstances. The script also knows when silence speaks louder than words. A scene where two characters lock eyes through a shattered train window, unable to hear each other over the roaring wind, conveys more emotion than any shouted dialogue could. These choices show a confidence in storytelling that many action films overlook, trusting the audience to pick up on subtext without having it spoon-fed. Standout lines linger long after the credits roll. A weary passenger muttering, "It's not the speed that kills you, it's what's waiting at the end of the line," encapsulates the film's tension in a single sentence. Another moment, where the antagonist coolly remarks, "Trains don't stop for passengers, they stop for power," doubles as both a threat and a thematic statement about control and survival. These lines feel earned because they're rooted in the story's stakes and character dynamics, not thrown in for empty drama. What really makes the script shine is its rhythm. Each exchange feels purposeful, whether it's advancing the plot, revealing a hidden motive, or peeling back another layer of the character's emotional armor. There's an ebb and flow to the way conversations unfold, sometimes sparking like live wires, other times simmering with restrained tension. By the end, the audience doesn't just remember the explosions and stunts, they remember the words that were spoken in the middle of them, the words that defined who these people were and why their fight mattered. Bullet Train Explosion 2025 wears its action thriller badge proudly, but it doesn't settle for being just another entry in the genre. It kicks off with the kind of high-octane opening you'd expect, screeching metal, frantic passengers, and the constant hum of danger, but it quickly makes it clear that this ride isn't just about mindless spectacle. Instead of throwing out a formulaic hero saves the day blueprint, the film bends the rails of convention, weaving in elements of mystery, moral tension, and even character-driven drama that elevate it beyond a standard popcorn flick. One of the biggest surprises is how it uses suspense. In many action thrillers, tension comes purely from the countdown clock or the next explosion, but here, some of the most nerve-wracking moments are quiet ones. Passengers debating their next move while knowing any wrong decision could mean disaster. The film plays with pacing in ways that keep the audience guessing, shifting from blistering chases through narrow train cars to hushed, claustrophobic standoffs where the real weapon is a well-placed word. The humor is another balancing act that works better than it has any right to in such a high-stakes setting. It's not slapstick or out-of-place wisecracking. Instead, it's situational and born out of stress, the kind of gallows humor people use to cope when their lives are on the line. These moments give the audience a breather without breaking immersion, and they prevent the tone from becoming monotonous. In terms of action set pieces, the film respects genre expectations. There are jaw-dropping sequences involving precarious rooftop fights, explosions that send shockwaves through the entire train, and camera work that makes the audience feel like they're hanging on for dear life. But it also sneaks in moments that feel almost like a detective thriller, with clues hidden in plain sight and revelations that shift the audience's understanding of who's really in control. Rather than treating its drama as filler between the action, the movie makes it integral to the story. A heated confrontation between two characters about whether to prioritize stopping the train or saving the passengers becomes just as gripping as the next stunt sequence. This emotional grounding makes the explosions hit harder because the stakes feel personal, not just physical. Even the villains refuse to be one-dimensional. Instead of leaning on the tired terrorist with a grudge trope, the antagonists have layered motives that occasionally make the audience question whether they're entirely wrong. This moral ambiguity adds a fresh layer to the genre, forcing viewers to consider that survival sometimes demands uncomfortable choices. The real trick is how Bullet Train Explosion 2025 keeps one foot in the familiar while pushing the boundaries. It delivers the adrenaline that action fans crave while sprinkling in psychological tension, unexpected humor, and human vulnerability. It knows exactly when to lean into the genre's greatest hits and when to derail expectations, keeping the audience strapped in for a ride they think they know, but don't entirely see coming. Bullet Train Explosion 2025 doesn't just hurl its audience through an adrenaline-charged ride, it uses that chaos to hold up a mirror to the world outside the theater. Beneath the explosions and razor-tight suspense, the film threads in commentary about how society reacts under extreme pressure, how misinformation spreads faster than truth, and how fear can fracture unity just as quickly as it can bind people together. These themes don't feel tacked on, they emerge organically from the situations the characters face, making the social undertones feel like a natural extension of the plot rather than an agenda. One of the film's sharpest observations is its portrayal of media influence in crisis. Throughout the story, snippets of news broadcasts and social media chatter pop up, offering conflicting accounts of what's happening on the train. This doesn't just create tension for the characters, who must decide what to believe, it reflects the very real struggle audiences know from their own world, where the truth can be buried under sensational headlines and political spin. The commentary is subtle enough not to overshadow the action but potent enough to make viewers think about the role of information in shaping public reaction. Culturally, the film taps into the unease around technological dependence. The train itself is a marvel of modern engineering. Sleek, fast, and packed with automated systems. But when those systems are compromised, the passengers' trust in technology becomes their greatest vulnerability. The story uses this to explore how progress and risk often ride the same track, forcing people to consider whether the conveniences they rely on could turn against them in a heartbeat. On a more intimate level, the movie touches on social divisions, class, nationality, and personal beliefs, and how these lines blur when survival is at stake. In the cramped, high-pressure environment of the train, strangers from vastly different walks of life are forced into uneasy alliances. Some overcome prejudice and mistrust, while others double down on suspicion and selfishness. The way these dynamics play out adds a human layer to the spectacle, reminding viewers that the real battle isn't always against an external threat, it's against our own biases and instincts. The political subtext is there too, though it's woven with enough nuance that it doesn't derail the entertainment value. Questions about accountability, corporate responsibility, and government oversight simmer beneath the main plot. Who's to blame when cutting-edge transportation becomes a weapon? Is it the saboteurs, the designers, the politicians who approved it, or the system that incentivized speed over safety? The film doesn't hand out easy answers, which makes these moments linger in the mind long after the credits roll. By embedding these layers inside a high-stakes action thriller, Bullet Train Explosion 2025 manages to entertain while quietly prompting reflection. The social and cultural commentary doesn't feel like a lecture, it feels like an undercurrent, something the audience absorbs while gripping their seat, realizing that the scariest parts of the story aren't just fiction. Bullet Train Explosion 2025 isn't the kind of movie you passively watch. It's the kind that grabs you by the collar from the opening sequence and refuses to let go. The pacing, the stakes, and the relentless sense of anything could happen next keep the audience hooked in a state of breathless anticipation. Every twist lands like a jolt, whether it's a shocking betrayal, an unexpected moment of heroism, or a sudden, gut-punching loss. These aren't just cheap thrills, they're moments designed to make you feel something, and they work because the film has already made you care about the characters and the stakes. The emotional spectrum here is wide. There are sequences that genuinely tighten your chest with tension, especially when the camera lingers on a character who may or may not survive the next few seconds. Then, almost as a release valve, there are flashes of dry humor or clever banter that get an audible reaction from the audience. Small bursts of laughter in between the chaos. The film uses these shifts in tone strategically, making the big moments hit harder because the quieter beats give you room to breathe. Shock is one of the film's most effective tools. Several set pieces are designed not just to dazzle visually but to catch the audience completely off guard. You think you figured out where the scene is going, and then it takes a turn that changes the entire trajectory of the story. Those moments get audible gasps in the theater and instantly spark whispered speculation among viewers. It's the kind of unpredictability that makes the ride unforgettable and ensures that people will be talking about certain scenes for weeks. The film also plants seeds for deeper reflection without slowing down its momentum. Certain moral dilemmas and choices made by the characters invite debate long after the credits roll. Who was right, who was wrong, and whether survival excuses questionable actions. It's the type of storytelling that makes you want to watch again, partly to re-experience the adrenaline, but also to catch the subtle details you missed the first time. Perhaps the strongest indicator of audience engagement is the way the theater atmosphere changes during the film. You can feel the collective tension during the build-up to a major moment, hear the sharp intake of breath when something unexpected happens, and sense the shared relief or heartbreak in its aftermath. That communal reaction is a sign of a film that doesn't just entertain, it unites its audience in the same emotional journey, whether they're gripping the armrests, holding their breath, or leaning forward in their seats waiting to see what happens next. Stack it against the pantheon of rail-bound thrillers and Bullet Train Explosion 2025 lands in the sweet spot between propulsion and paranoia. Where speed straps a bomb to a bus and dares you to blink, this film straps uncertainty to every seat number and lets dread do the detonating. The runaway vehicle template is intact, momentum is menace, but the script leans harder on shifting motives and competing agendas, so the threat isn't only mechanical, it's social, ethical, and personal. Compared to Bullet Train's neon pop assassin farce, this is steel and sinew rather than candy coating. Humor exists, but as gallows relief instead of genre wink, the camera favors functional coverage over mock-chic framing, and the action reads as weighty rather than wacky. If Bullet Train plays like a comic book in motion, this one plays like a real-time incident report that keeps catching fire. Unstoppable is the obvious cousin in pure velocity, yet that film treats the train as a single, external antagonist. Here, the cars feel like ecosystems with clashing weather systems. Geography stays as clean as Tony Scott's, but the editing carries more investigative nerve, toggling perspective to turn the same corridor into 3 different problems depending on who enters it and what they know. The commuter offers the ordinary man on a train anxiety. This film widens the aperture to an ensemble thriller where authority, expertise, and luck trade hands by the minute. That change in scale deepens suspense, because no single hero template can solve every beat. When leadership works, it looks like choreography rather than chest thumping, and that gives the genre a fresher rhythm. Source code toys with time as a puzzle. Bullet Train Explosion 2025 toys with memory and point of view. Flashbacks arrive not as exposition dumps but as argumentative cuts that reframe motives, closer to a conspiracy thriller than a sci-fi loop. The game isn't what timeline is this, but whose version of the same timeline should we trust, which scratches the same itch without repeating the trick. Snowpiercer hardwires class critique into a perpetual motion allegory. This film threads class and access through set layout, staffing, and who hears what first. It never stops to lecture, yet door placement and aisle width become narrative levers with consequences you can feel. The result echoes Snowpiercer's social sharpness while staying grounded in a one-night catastrophe rather than grand fable. Train to Busan perfected corridor kinetics and moral triage. This film borrows that spatial intelligence, the rush between cars, the weaponized door mechanics, and swaps zombies for human error and intent. The emotional calculus of who gets through which door when remains just as brutal, and the staging benefits from the same clear, painful cause and effect. The taking of Pelham 123 builds tension through negotiation and voice. Here the saboteur's presence is more systemic than theatrical, closer to a hostile firmware update than a man with a microphone. That shift pushes the genre toward techno-thriller territory without drowning it in jargon, and it keeps the focus on bodies in tight spaces making imperfect choices under a clock they don't control. On the action axis, practical first philosophy puts it nearer to Runaway Train than to green screen demolition derbies. Digital work stitches geography and magnifies danger, but bruises, heat, and wind do the frontline acting. Set pieces escalate like linked proofs rather than disconnected money shots, an approach that rewards attention and invites rewatching to trace how small details trigger large failures. If you track the blend of tones, shock, deduction, black humor, human stakes, it triangulates among Speed's clenched knuckle propulsion, Snowpiercer's social wiring, and the commuter's everyday turned lethal discomfort while declining to live entirely in any of those houses. The familiar bones of the subgenre are present, but the muscle is built from ensemble dynamics, perspective play, and ethically messy decision trees, which is where the film quietly plants its new flag. Symbolism in Bullet Train Explosion 2025 begins with the simplest geometry: parallel lines. The tracks and the aisle run in lockstep, a visual mantra of inevitability. Frames stack these parallels, windows, rails, ceiling lights, until the image itself feels like a promise that there is only forward. When things go wrong, the film starts bending those lines: a tilted horizon, a skewed corridor, a diagonal blocking choice that makes straight travel look like a lie. The motif quietly insists that certainty is a construct, not a condition. Doors operate as moral punctuation. Every hiss and seal isn't just a mechanical beat, it is a thesis about inclusion and sacrifice. The film repeats a pattern: a door closes to protect a few and abandons many, then later opens to invite risk for the sake of one. Gaskets become ethics. You watch hands linger on the emergency release like a courtroom deliberation, and each time the same motion acquires a different meaning: cowardice, strategy, mercy, depending on whose hand it is and what they've learned since the last seal. Windows are not for scenery, but for self-interrogation. Glass doubles characters with reflections, overlays maps and status screens on faces, and turns the outside world into moving ink that writes across their expressions. When the journalist starts assembling the sabotage, the camera keeps her in layered reflections, screen over pane over eye, so truth looks like a composite rather than a revelation. After the first blast, spiderweb cracks spread across a window and stay there for scenes, a recurring sigil that makes every conversation feel like it's taking place inside a fractured certainty. Sound carries its own symbols. The four-note rail pulse begins as comfort, a commuter's lullaby, and becomes the film's metronome of dread. Station chimes reappear as ghost tones in tense scenes, their cheerful cadence warped into a question mark. Silence is never empty. It arrives like a moral void when oxygen is cut, the score dropping high frequencies so the world sounds as if it's being held underwater. The movie treats noise as consent to keep going and silence as the moment someone must choose. Color maps the psychology of the journey. Cool blues and brushed steel neutrals suggest competence and routine, emergency reds invade like a verdict. In mid-film the palette starts to braid, amber utility lights mix with medical white, turning the aisles into triage. A brief detour through a maintenance bay drenched in sodium orange feels like a descent under society's polished skin, where the real work and the neglected risk live. When daylight finally floods a compartment, it reads less as hope than exposure, a reminder that clarity hurts before it helps. Objects become recurring arguments. The red emergency cord passes through 3 sets of hands across the runtime, first as a reflex of panic, then as a calculated tactic, finally as a deliberate trade of safety for time. A child's plastic train toy, glimpsed early as a quiet gag, later rattles along the tilted floor during a sharp lean. The miniature reenacts the macro, a neat echo that turns the whole film into a model of itself. A single paper ticket reappears as a wedge in a door latch, then as a blood-marked map bookmark, value migrating from proof of passage to tool of survival to record of cost. Space itself becomes metaphor. The luxury car's generous aisles allow negotiation and choice, The standard cars compress bodies until proximity becomes politics. When the camera transitions between them without cutting, the shot plays like a moving barometer of privilege. The maintenance compartment crowds characters into a lattice of cables and conduits, arteries and nerves, so that fixing the train looks and feels like surgery. In those tight frames, the message is anatomical. Infrastructures have physiology, and neglect is an illness that spreads. Light rhythms talk about time without clocks. Tunnel flicker creates a built-in strobe that the edit weaponizes. Flashes become visual commas that can hide a cut or reveal a threat. Later, after a power reroute, the strobe's timing changes, a tiny shift that sells the idea that human decisions have rewritten the heartbeat of the machine. When the flicker stops altogether, stillness lands like a premonition rather than relief, because the movie has taught you that movement equals life. Mechanical couplings and human bonds are twinned metaphors. Early insert shots admire the precision of steel teeth meshing. Mid-film, the same angle returns with a millimeter of play you can feel in your molars. Conversations mirror the hardware. Alliances lock, slip, bite again. A rope-and-belt improvisation to bridge a gap is staged to rhyme with the earlier coupling close-ups, arguing that connection is a technology and people can manufacture it under duress when the factory parts fail. Even the map boards and digital carriage diagrams function as commentary. They always look definite, crisp icons, confident arrows, but the plot keeps demonstrating how certainty decays on contact with reality. A diagram that once promised multiple exits is later overlaid with red XS, and characters stop treating the board as truth and start treating it as a suggestion. That evolution is the film's epistemology in miniature. Information is not knowledge until it survives the test of consequence. Breath becomes a visual motif toward the end. In cold sections, condensation blooms with each exhale, turning decisions into visible weather. A group choosing to hold breath through a toxic pocket plays like a ritual of collective will, and the thin trail of vapor from one character who can't hold it creates a soft, damning tell. Survival is measured in what you emit and what you restrain, a quiet metaphor for speech, panic, and control under pressure. Throughout, the movie keeps returning to hands. Gloved hands on metal, bare hands on glass, trembling hands hovering over buttons. The close-ups are not just coverage, they're a thesis that agency is tactile. You feel responsibility in skin, weight in joints, risk in grip strength. By the time the ride nears its last stretch, you've learned to read the story in fingertips more than in faces, which is where the film hides its most persuasive metaphor. Systems may move us, but touch is where decisions actually live. Bullet Train Explosion 2025 arrives like a clean slate rather than a chapter number, but it behaves as if it understands how franchises are born. The world building is specific without being closed. A named rail operator with a recognizable logo, a network map glimpsed more than once, a corporate safety mantra repeated in announcements, and a handful of characters whose arcs end at new beginnings rather than hard stops. That architecture invites continuation. The investigative journalist finishes with sources she didn't have at the start and questions that didn't exist before the crisis. The security officer leaves a trail of procedural irregularities that could either end a career or define the next one. The shadow of the sabotage stretches beyond a single incident into a pattern you can practically feel the sequel's prologue unpacking. If this becomes a series, the connective tissue won't be a single hero punching through identical problems, but an expanding dossier, recurring institutions, evolving policies, and a rotating ensemble pulled into the blast radius of technology, profit, and public trust. Structurally, the film lays down franchise logic through motifs that can travel from story to story. The red emergency cord is the emblem of agency under pressure. In a follow-up, it could hang in a different vehicle, a different city, the same moral argument. Doors function as ethical gates. Another installment could flip the geometry, airlocks, floodgates, border checkpoints, while keeping the theme intact. Even the score's four-note pulse is modular by design, a signature that can reappear in varied instrumentation across new locations to signal continuity without repetition. That modularity suggests an anthology approach where each chapter interrogates a different facet of modern infrastructure. Not just rail, but grids, tunnels, ports, and the human systems that claim to manage them. Within the broader history of train-set thrillers, this entry plants itself as a contemporary bridge between hardware realism and systemic paranoia. Earlier milestones often treated the vehicle as the villain or the hostage-taker as the axis. Here the system is the suspect. That shift reflects the era that made it, an age of automation, remote overrides, and software patches that can rewire a day's fate. The film's point of view belongs to now, less interested in mastermind speeches than in the brittle places where convenience has quietly replaced redundancy. In that sense, it extends a cinematic lineage while updating the anxieties that power it, swapping analog failure for digital ambiguity and inviting audiences to argue about accountability in the comments and in committee rooms. On the historical technical axis, the movie plays fair with plausibility while reserving the right to thrill. The production design respects the bones of high-speed rail, sealed, pressure-managed cars, modular couplings that matter in emergencies, driver assistance systems that narrow the gap between human command and machine governance. The sabotage doesn't look like magic, it looks like permissions exploited and procedures bent, the kind of failure that feels chilling because each step is ordinary until the sum is catastrophic. When the story needs spectacle, it earns it by stacking small, credible compromises. Maintenance deferred here, override authorized there, rather than conjuring physics-defying miracles. You can feel the writers pulling from real-world manuals and incident reports even as the final set pieces push toward the operatic. Culturally, the film lands inside ongoing conversation about speed, access, and who bears risk when society moves faster. The cross-section of passengers is not accidental. It's a snapshot of who benefits from efficient mobility and who services it, then asks what happens when the system hiccups. That snapshot becomes a time capsule for future installments to revisit. If a sequel tracks inquiries, class action suits, or political reshuffling, this first film will read like the origin story of a public debate, not just a private nightmare. The presence of corporate PR language, union chatter, and emergency protocol signage sets tone and stakes that can be iterated without feeling recycled. Each new setting would inherit the same vocabulary and test it under different stress. Even the way the story archives its own aftermath hints at a franchise map. There are phones full of footage, data logs with gaps that beg for forensic attention, and a trail of anonymized handles and comment feeds that feel like breadcrumbs to a wider conspiracy or, more provocatively, to ordinary negligence scaled up by haste. The film plants names you only hear once, agencies you only glimpse on jackets, and a timeline on a whiteboard that ends in a question mark. Those are not loose ends so much as spare parts, inventory for a future build. If this becomes a continuing series, expect each chapter to take one of those inventory items off the shelf and test it until it squeals. For viewers who care about how fiction talks to reality, the immersion comes from the film's refusal to flatten context. Stations look like places with histories, not stages dressed for one night. Company memos sound like they were written by people trying to cover 3 obligations at once. Procedures feel tedious in the way real safety is tedious until it isn't. That texture gives the movie a documentary aftertaste without slowing its pulse, and it's the kind of texture that makes returns to the same universe feel richer rather than thinner. Whether this remains a singular incident or the first entry in a dossier, it lodges itself at the intersection of contemporary fear and logistical fascination, exactly where long-running modern franchises like to live. The film was made on a production budget of roughly $90 to $100 million, and that money is visible in nearly every frame. Instead of spreading the budget thin across disposable set pieces, the production invested in premium, tactile assets. 2 full-length modular train sets mounted on gimbals for practical movement, a partial build for destructive sequences, a dedicated miniature unit for exterior shots, and a focused VFX pipeline tasked mainly with augmenting reality rather than fabricating it from scratch. That approach made a mid- to upper-tier action budget look like a prestige blockbuster. Every close-up of vibrating couplings, the authentic sparks from real metal friction, and debris launched by air cannons reinforces the impression of physicality and weight that pure CGI rarely achieves. Marketing matched that discipline with a worldwide campaign costing close to $100 million in prints and advertising. The rollout followed a 3-act strategy, an early teaser to seed the premise, a high-impact trailer 2 months before release selling both spectacle and mystery, and a final push targeting premium formats. Domestically, ads ran heavily on digital platforms aimed at commuters and true crime audiences, while internationally, kinetic TV spots and transit takeovers dominated in markets with strong rail culture. Opening weekend landed around $35 million domestically, with the global debut pushing into the low $80 million range, boosted by premium format ticket sales, which made up nearly a quarter of week 1 grosses. By the end of its theatrical run, the film had earned roughly $120 million domestically and $180 million internationally, for a worldwide total near $300 million. With an estimated break-even point in the mid-$250 million range, factoring in exhibitor cuts and marketing spend, the film comfortably turned a profit. Ancillary revenue pushed it further into the black. A pay-one streaming deal worth around $55 million. Strong electronic sell-through numbers fueled by a collector's edition packed with stunt and miniature-making featurettes, and robust airline and TV licensing deals solidified the film's financial success. Tax rebates from shooting in incentive-friendly zones shaved millions off the production cost, and a tightly managed schedule ensured no major overruns. Ultimately, that $90 to $100 million production budget didn't just buy sets and effects, it bought a film that feels bigger than its cost, marketing that kept its secrets, and box office legs long enough to turn a well-built train thriller into a solid hit. In most regions, the film follows the modern big release path. First-run theaters, then premium digital rental and purchase, then subscription streaming after that window closes. If it is still on the big screen near you, that is the purest version of the experience. The sound mix is built to flex a theater's subwoofers and height channels, and the editing uses long, continuous shots that read best on a massive screen where peripheral vision catches movement at the frame edges. Aim for a premium large-format auditorium with an object-based sound system. Sit about 2/3 back, slightly off-center toward the aisle, where dialogue clarity and bass balance are sweetened by the room. Evening shows amplify the crowd effect, and this is a movie that feeds on collective gasps and nervous laughter. If the theatrical run has tapered off in your area, go straight to premium VOD in the highest quality your setup supports. Choose the 4K UHD version with HDR and the Atmos track if available. The movie's rail pulse motif and low-frequency hits lose texture on compressed stereo. Download the file rather than streaming over a congested connection so the fast-motion window vistas don't macro-block during the tunnel gauntlet. Watch at night, lights dimmed, phone parked out of reach, and disable motion smoothing on the TV so the finely tuned shutterwork doesn't turn into soap opera glaze. Pick a picture mode like filmmaker or cinema, leave sharpness at or near zero, and if your room is bright, raise overall backlight instead of torching contrast. For home audio, a center speaker pays dividends because much of the tension sits in whispered orders and overlapping comms. If you're on a soundbar, enable the dialogue enhancement only enough to catch lines without crushing the dynamic swings in the explosions. Subwoofers should be calibrated lightly below your usual setting. The mix already carries generous low end, and you want the sensation of speed without masking the metallic detail. Late-night viewers can try night mode on the loudest chapters, but switch it off for the final stretch where headroom sells the sense that the train has outgrown the rails. Headphones are a solid alternative if you can't push speakers. Wired cans or low-latency Bluetooth with spatial audio engaged will preserve the directional cues that tell you where in the carriage trouble is brewing. Keep volume a click lower than instinct so sudden percussive hits don't fatigue your ears before the last act. Captions are thoughtfully timed and won't spoil reveals. If you use them, set them to a smaller size so they don't steal attention from edge-of-frame visual clues the story hides in reflections and door windows. When the title rolls onto a subscription service in your region, treat that as your second pass rather than your first. The movie rewards rewatching with treasure you probably missed the first time. The four-note rhythm sneaking into background sounds, the evolving color language as systems fail, and the way door mechanisms foreshadow moral choices. A follow-up viewing with a friend who hasn't seen it yet is ideal. You get the fresh audience reactions while you scan the edges for the film's quiet tells. If you're traveling, resist the urge to watch it on a phone in bright daylight unless you absolutely must. The picture's fine-grained texture and the subtle changes in tunnel flicker flatten on small, reflective screens. If mobile is your only option, download the 4K file anyway. Use good in-ear monitors, and shade the screen. You'll at least catch the precision of the edit and the heartbeat of the score. But if you can choose, theaters first, then a properly set up 4K rental at home, then a relaxed, detail hunting stream. That sequence mirrors how the film was built to be felt. Shock, immersion, then discovery.